a lot to dive into there with that final discussion, but we
I'll let you,
are.
I'll let you kick off. I'll let you kick off the next one because I think we're kind of wanted to do this a little differently for everybody with the next game that we both tangentially have been playing a new release, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Layers of Fear, the 2023 reimagining, would you call it?
Yeah, I think that seems like a good word.
Okay.
I think they may
So
have used that, but it's a good word.
so I just to lay the groundwork, I'd never played Layers of Fear 1, never played Layers of Fear 2, and so I was going into this fresh. I have to be honest, Jeffrey, I am not the biggest fan of these kind of walking sim-ish horror titles. Having said that, I really, really enjoyed this game. I played through it in like 2 days. I was really hooked by this game and just the weird setup of the narrative of kind of my favorite thing about this game is it almost feels like a choose your own adventure, but just in your movement. Like, do I go down this hallway or that hallway? I have to make that decision because I know that the door behind me will probably be locked, and then that's going to open up into a new world. And then it's like almost such a silly comparison, but almost Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart esque, where you're constantly swapping in between these worlds instantaneously. It's very impressive from a technical perspective. What is going on here with Layers of Fear? I it's a tale of two halves for me. The first half of the game I really, really, really enjoyed. The do we want to get into? Well, I'll just say that the first half of the game I really
Yeah.
enjoyed.
Let's
This,
avoid spoilers, but we can say because it's still broken up into segments. That's not a spoiler because it's basically real quick. I won't ruin your tangent or not your tangent. I won't ruin what you're saying, but basically for those that don't know, this reimagining of Layers of Fear, because I'm someone that played all the previous ones and like a lot of it, where that's what's cool about our perspective. This reimagining is essentially Layers of Fear 1 and all of its DLC, Layers of Fear 2 and all of its DLC, but there's an overarching story that grasps onto it that links everything together and then intersperses a bunch of new stuff to flesh it out into one full game. So that's all I wanted to say because I think we have that unique perspective of you never playing it, me playing it, and now playing this one together. So sorry, go ahead.
no, that was pretty much it. I was just saying it's a tale of two halves. The first half of the game I really, really enjoyed. The back half of it, I started to come around on it the more I played it, but it felt wildly inferior in my opinion. It felt like even from a technical perspective, what was going on with the world and even the visuals, um, even down to like the controls felt just slightly clunkier in the back half of that game. It was a little bit bizarre how drastic of a decline it was, but the first half of the game was excellent, absolutely excellent. I loved the first half of the game.
What's interesting about you, it's cool hearing you talk about it because it's very much reminiscent of when Layers of Fear the original came out and then Layers of Fear 2, because Layers of Fear 1 when it originally came out was just that, a walking sim horror game. I personally adore that because I like that feeling of just walking through like a haunted house. And sometimes I just want to turn my brain off and explore. But Layers of Fear 2, you can tell the developer. So it's Bloober Team, for those that don't know, Bloober Team, who's obviously made a lot of horror games, the upcoming Silent Hill 2 remaster. But the Layers of Fear 2 almost took the approach of something like Outlast in the sense that they kind of removed some of the walking sim and made it where you're really just like you have to run away from enemies a lot. It's a little bit more corridored and like linear. They took away a lot of what made the first one unique to try to almost make it more quote unquote mainstream of a horror game. But by nature of what you're saying, it almost made it more antiquated, where the
Yeah,
first one really leaned into like you turn around, the room's different, you look up, the room's different. Just like you're saying, that is, as someone that played the first to seeing this new one, where I think they redid it in Unreal Engine 5, I
yeah,
believe. Holy crap. As someone that played the first to this one, seeing these new worlds just quickly like swap, I don't know how that wizardry is done. And they deserve to be so praised for that because it's truly incredible.
yeah.
So where did you feel like when you swapped to like the second part then, like which is technically Layers of Fear 2 or the the other story, the actor,
Yeah,
where
the
did you
actor.
feel like it for you was like, no, this isn't it?
Immediately, like
Immediately.
immediately. It was because the close, and once again, no spoilers, but the
Mhm.
closing bits of that first story, the artist, the painter, that was crazy on a technical level. Seeing these, like looking up and almost seeing this endless uh endless rays above you in the kind of library section where you're kind of platforming around, and like it was just mind-boggling how the scale, the epic scale that you felt with that towards the end of that first story. And then it got very, like you said, more limited with tighter corridors and not as much quick swapping to these new these new locations on the fly. It was a little bit more, felt like you said, more traditional, a little bit of backtracking going on, a little bit more of a little bit more explorability in the
Mhm.
ship setting, but it wasn't, it just didn't have that kind of technical wow factor that the first part of the game had. And I noticed that instantly, even from like just very, very small details. It was weird. It was kind of jarring.
Hmm. So to be fully transparent, I know. So you obviously finished the game, the
I,
the
I
new one we're talking about, right?
I finished everything
And
except the two little there's like two little DLC add-ons.
okay. So yeah, just for full transparency for anyone wondering, I don't want to, have any like, not being upfront. You finished it all. I've only currently at the time recording this played through the first half, which is like technically the layers of one, Fear One, the painter story, which, with all of like the lighthouse in between like story that kind of glues it all together without spoilers, of course. So I haven't even jumped. I've just now, my save is just starting the ship section. So it's curious to hear what you say, because I'll be interested to see if I feel that same way as you did. So I just
Right.
want to be fully transparent of kind of where we're both at with that, having the perspective of one that's played it, one who hasn't. You finished it. Now I'm working on finishing it. So just so people know.
Yeah, yeah. The one thing I will there's one section in not to spoil anything, but it's this black
Okay.
and white section in part two, the actor story, and how they use like little splashes of color in that was very, very impressive on that front. But I I want to kick it to you, man. What did you, the first half of that game? What are your kind of overall takeaways from it? Because I loved, like, really, and I'm not into these style of games at all, but how immediate the how immediate it delivered new things to you. It just it like kept my lizard brain going, where I was like, I can't quit doing this. Like, you're constantly giving me something new to look at, something new to digest from a story perspective. Like, I was wowed by this game, the first part, on a technical level. So what did you think
Yeah.
about it?
Yeah, I no, you hit that right. The way it just keeps you, and you like variety, the way it keeps variety going, not necessarily in terms of like you're doing new gameplay things, but there's variety in terms of you're literally constantly seeing a new version of a room or a hallway or a whatever, right? And so this isn't a spoiler. This is just part of the story. So essentially, this first part is called the painter, and you play literally as that, a painter who unfortunately has had some family downfall, we'll just call it, and it's him painting his magnum opus. I'm not going to say any more than that, but it delves into very, very deep psychological horror, very touchy themes at times, and it's very a challenging story. But here's what I'll say: the first Layers of Fear from years and years ago, this may be like a hot take, is one of my favorite horror games. Period. But again, I like that walking sim style. I love going to haunted houses, like haunted attractions. So for me, Layers of Fear feels like a gamified haunted attraction. I can get why you wouldn't like that because there's not as much gameplay. It's literally walking. Um, but what they did with this 2023 reimagining is they completely reshaped it. It's so different than the first game, where I kept expecting to see the same things that I remembered, and it constantly changed it, whether that was the environment or a little puzzle or how you interact with the stage or when the door shifts or whatever. They completely reimagined it to where if you thought you knew something from the previous one, they changed that on you. I'm going to do one spoiler. This is a jump scare spoiler.
Okay.
I'm gonna say it now, because so if you don't want a scare spoiler, click off, come back in a couple minutes. Did you get scared by when you turn around and by the book monster, where you turn around and there all the books just go? Do you even
I
remember that?
I don't really the moment. that spooked me the most from the game was, honestly, I got the first encounter with an enemy threat, we'll just say. That was the first time I got really spooked by the game because I didn't think that that was in the game at all. I
It
didn't think
wasn't.
there. Oh,
It wasn't in the
okay.
first one.
Okay. Yeah, that was the first time I was like, "Oh my God, okay, I did not see that coming." And then the voice and the kind of the how they played with the audio there, that kind of spooked me out a little bit. But that would I really wasn't scared at all by the game. I was just it was constantly just impressive to me. But yeah, dive a
Okay.
little bit more into that library monster. What got you with that?
The only reason I bring that up is because a lot of channels that have done like let's plays or live streams of Layers of Fear, there's this moment where, again, it's a spoiler. So if you don't want to hear it, click off for a minute. There's in the original game, there's this room that you walk into, like this kind of creepy library, kind of gothic room. And you walk up to like this painting on the wall. There's like a hand that kind of like looks like it's coming out of the painting. And so you're immersed in this moment of seeing this hand like moving out of the painting. And then when you turn around, just like you turn around in any game, all of a sudden there's this pile of books that like looks like it's like a creature. Then all of a sudden just goes, poof. And it doesn't sound scary, but in the moment you're so connected by, and this is the first game, you're so connected by what's happening in this painting, you won't even think that there's going to be something behind you. I was so ready for that moment in this new game. It happened at a completely different time and gave me the jump scare all over again. So that's where I wanted to tie it back into the point of they take what you expected, but then swapped it to a new area or reimagined it completely, which to me was revolutionary because they could have just kept it in the same spot. But you don't even remember that, it sounds like. So
I don't even
that's unfortunate.
remember that taking place. That's so bizarre. I don't remember that section at all. And
Okay.
I loved the libraries. That was like my favorite point from the painter's story. I loved that entire section. It's weird to me too that it feels almost once again like I'm sure this is a main section that everybody has and it just isn't clicking with my brain, but it almost feels that you can experience different things in Layers of Fear that like maybe someone else wouldn't experience because like I said, you're going down these corridors and every door you enter almost makes it feel like a decision that you're making. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm going to go down this path and I don't know, it could be once again the illusion of choice, but I if you're doing it this well to where I feel like okay, now I'm not able to go back to this door and like I enjoy that sense of choice and that sense of like what am I missing on this other end, which it could be nothing. And once again, that's the great thing about playing with choice and playing with the illusion of choice in a horror game like this. I think they did that really well by making it feel like you had a little bit of agency from where you go and what you see. It kind of felt like your own story. And I know they have multiple endings, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. Yeah, there are multiple endings. I'm glad that you mentioned the player agency because the changes for anyone wondering who also played the first. To your point, the changes that are overarching, and these aren't well, actually. Well, you already mentioned doesn't matter now. So the changes, yeah, the first game didn't have that many choices. It was very much linear. That was a surprise. So again, this shouldn't really be a spoiler because they've kind of shown it in trailers, but the fact that there's now an entity, that's all I'll say. That wasn't in the first game. You know how you get the lantern now?
Yeah.
Also wasn't in the first game. So they kind of gamified it more, which to me actually felt more like a hindrance. I wish they didn't add the entity. I wish they didn't add the lantern. It for me, it just took away some of the more raw walking through this haunted house experience. However, I can see how it makes it a little bit more of a game, I guess. So I guess it does add some, but then it sounds like in this chapter two or whatever, the actor story on the ship, it sounds like everything just becomes really generic or like just kind of like lackluster from what you've said, right? For the most part.
I wouldn't say that. It's just
Okay.
it's once again, I have to be very, very clear. I loved that first half. So the fact that it was a few steps back for me, it didn't mean I hated the second half or thought it was,
Okay.
just not up to snuff. It was just like not on par with the first part of the game. That painter story was absolutely excellent in my opinion, and it wasn't quite as good as the first part.
Okay.
To go back for a second for what you were talking on before about the adding the entity. See, once again, the kind of differences there is that was like my favorite part of the game. I
Okay.
loved having that voice in my head and running around and trying to find, the little cogs to turn the wheel, and this entity is charging at me and I never know where they're coming from, and I'm having to keep my lantern prepared at all times. And just the looping nature of sort of the environments that they created where you're having to run from this character.
Mhm.
I really really enjoyed how that was set up. Not to spoil anything for you, I did not like how they did it in the part two. You use a flashlight, and I think the mechanic is really cool with the flashlight that you use. And I won't go too much into that, but
Mhm.
how they use the mechanic with the flashlight ends up kind of playing out as like a film reel, and
Hmm.
you have these interactions with mannequins, and that is really cool to see that play out. And it's once again you're changing, you're shifting the world on the fly, but it just wasn't nearly the threat, wasn't nearly as intimate, wasn't nearly as scary as the threat in the painter story. Also,
Okay.
weird tie here. I know this came out way before the Amber Heard Johnny Depp thing, but I was constantly thinking about the Amber Heard Johnny Depp thing while playing through the painter story, because there's so much of that kind of
Ah.
that crazy, uh, can I say the thing about a finger, cutting off a finger, and
You already said it now, so sure. You
and,
already said it
and,
now.
and drawing on walls with your blood and stuff. It's like, okay. Which once again, this came out before that, and I'm sure all of these tortured artists have these ridiculous, stupid relationships where it's
I'm sure.
just an absolute hellscape to deal with. But it
Yeah.
felt very. I was like, oh my God, are they pulling from this? But once again, it came out before that trial. But my brain constantly kept going back. It's
Hmm.
like, yeah, well, am I going to find a damn turd in the bed here? What we got going on?
But but I think that's a great point though, because it just points to the variety in the game and how they clearly know how to constantly provide psychological scares and provide that variety that you like, where you really just don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
More so in the first section. But I have a question for you, and this isn't it's kind of a tangent, but kind of not, because of the development team, Bloober team. How do you I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. So the upcoming Silent Hill 2 remake, which we don't know really too much about. So Bloober team is the one doing this. How do you feel, at least having played this Layers of Fear reimagining, does this give you more hope that, like, wow, they know how to create a creepy world? Does it give you less hope? I'm just curious from your perspective, how does that make you feel about them handling the upcoming Silent Hill 2 remake? That's maybe a little bit too tangential for us kind of like reviewing this game, but
No. Yeah, no, it's
I'm just curious of your thought.
that segment totally ties in. It's hmm. Okay. Once again, there is next to no gameplay here. And which I one totally vibed with in that first part of the game. It was a-okay with me. But Silent Hill, I don't know how Bloober is going to handle gunplay and the third person movement. Like, these are things with, like, the medium was a third person perspective, but once again, no gameplay really going on there. No, especially no combat. And I should say no combat, not no gameplay. There's gameplay, but
Right.
no combat. I haven't seen Bloober execute combat at all. And that's still the main question mark for me. If they can nail that, I have no worries about Bloober executing on the atmosphere with Silent
Hmm.
Hill. Not to be disrespectful here, but Bloober has developed games that I think are just as atmospheric as any of the Silent Hill games. They are
Hmm.
excellent, excellent with that. You got, in my opinion, the first part of Layers of Fear 1 of what we played, that's about as good of atmospheric horror as I've ever seen in my life.
Hmm. I mean, that's cool to hear you say that, because I honestly didn't, going into this day, I didn't know how, I really just didn't know how you feel about it. So that's cool to hear that. I agree with you completely, though. I think that they nail atmosphere perfectly. And as we know, Silent Hill, we won't keep going on the Silent Hill thing much longer, but um, Silent Hill is so much about atmosphere. So
Yeah.
that if they can at least bring that side of it, it was just cool to hear your perspective of their atmosphere. I want to ask one last quick thing about the story, real quick, if you don't mind. So the overarching story of this lighthouse, there's this woman who's trying to write again, try not to keep it spoilers. Who's trying to write a story. It's like a mother and son thing on a phone call. They're figuring out things. She's at this lighthouse. It's very vague, but it kind of ties all the stories together. Like she's the overarching omniscient one, if you will. Did you like these connecting dots of this lighthouse story and this woman who's writing the overarching part? Did that feel like it connected things for you? Did it feel like it wasn't necessary? I'm just kind of, because that's not obviously in the first games. So I'm just curious
Oh,
how that
okay.
felt to you, this
Well,
overarching narrative.
so what I'll say is like that theme continues throughout part two and throughout the actor story. And I really, really started to appreciate it later on. I really wasn't sure what was going on at first, but then I completely, well, I shouldn't say completely got it because I think a lot of it's up to your own interpretation of the story. Like they, if I had any complaints with the story at all is, and once again, this comes from my dude bro Fast and Furious appreciation of the arts, but there it's a very, very vague story, and the revelations are all in your mind of you know, as the player kind of figuring out painting your own story, which you know obviously ties together with all the artistic themes that we're exploring here. And it, but if my only thing with the story is I kind of wish that they could give you a little bit more of a bow at the end to wrap things up. But once again, I do appreciate the fact that you're interpreting the story how you wish, especially with that first part. The second was a little bit more wrapped up and felt more conclusive to me, but the first part, it is very much your own interpretation. And from the writer's perspective, really, I also really, really impressed with that conclusion as well. So yeah, I enjoyed having that connective thread and the sort of muse and the whole, you know, just in this lighthouse that is feels constantly like decaying and corrupted, and using that as your energy source to allow you to write. Like yeah, it felt like its own element of horror that was detached but connected to the two bigger plots.
Okay. That's cool to hear that. I like to hear that your perspective on it as someone that's new. I guess to kind of, and let me know if there's any other questions. I guess to kind of reviewify this, as we're trying to at least provide an overall context. Is this a game, this 2023 or reimagining, is this a game that you would personally recommend to people, based either if they're horror fans, just game fans? Like, would you recommend people spend money on it? Do you think it's a game that is going to provide, like, what's your overall recommendation if you had to have one for this game?
Yeah, it's only $30. It's 29.99 if I'm not mistaken, right?
And I should have mentioned this to you before. If you own the first two games, it's less. It was, for me, it was $20 on Xbox
Oh wow. Wow,
because I own
that's
the first two games. That was a huge prize. It was like $20.99. So just FYI.
yeah, that's I mean, for $20, absolutely pick this thing. I would say $30. Even the first half alone, let me be clear. This is a meaty game. This got some meat on its bones, man. There we're talking about the first part of the game's probably 4 or 5 hours, and then the next part's probably, you know, 4 or 5 hours or so. Like you're talking about an 8 to 10 hour game here. And
Yeah.
you get the DLC added on with the inheritance story and something else, which I haven't played those yet. But
Mm-hmm.
the main chunks of the game, you're talking about an 8-ish hour adventure for $30. So the only, like, there were a few little nitpicks I had. I
Yeah.
thought that the whenever like you would pick up a note and it would totally cut off the speaker, the kind of you know, inner monologue or whatever was going on, any sort of speaking that was going on, you would pick up a note and it would start reading from the note, which I do like. I like that the notes are all narrated in the first part of the game, which is not so much in the second part, which is weird. But
Yeah, it
the
is.
yeah, the notes are all narrated, so you really just, you know, if you don't want to read anything, you really don't have to read much of anything, which, you know, is wonderful. But the unfortunate thing there is it'll cut off, like if some big moments being presented to you in the story and you pick up a note, it'll cut off the speaker for the main part of the story and start reading the note, and then for me it wouldn't go back to speaking in the main narrative. And also a lot of the in terms of the dialogue in general, it felt jumpy. Like it felt like the
Mm.
speaker would, and it didn't feel like it had like natural pauses, which
Okay.
it's not huge complaints, but those would be kind of my only two complaints, along with the second part not being quite up to on par with the first part of the game, in my opinion.
Okay. No, that's good. I mean, those are the things I think people want to also know if they're going to be spending their money. On a quick side thing, because I know some people are interested in this, the first Layers of Fear, I keep going back to because again, it's still the first game and the second one reimagined. It's not completely new. The first game, at least on Xbox, just didn't have good performance. The frame rate was abysmal. Like
Oh
it
wow.
was constantly all over the place until they eventually fixed it. For anyone wondering, this new version, at least in my experience, you can tell me otherwise, on Series X, flawless. I didn't encounter any. The only issue, actually, I lied. The only issue I did encounter was there's like this section where you have to pick up telephones, and then you have to like put in numbers on a rotary phone. That for me glitched a
Yeah.
couple times. Did that happen for you, where like it didn't always
Yep.
like spin right, or you had to reset it or something?
Yeah, yeah. You
Okay.
would type in the number correctly, and it would either like it wouldn't pull far enough when you're holding down R or the right trigger or whatever. Yeah, that happened to me as
Yeah.
well.
But above and beyond that, the game feels great, and there is a quality mode and a performance mode. Some people like to know that in the options menu. If you want to choose with even the best visuals, you can do a 30 FPS mode, and then you can also do the performance mode, which is how I played 60 FPS. So just know a lot of people do care, especially when it's a first person game.
Yeah.
The frame rate, at least on Series X, is that where you played it?
Yep. Played it on Series X.
Is flawless. Yeah. So just that's at least a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
I would recommend this game again. Full transparency, I've only played the first half of this one, so I can't take that with a grain of salt, if you will, then, since I haven't played the back half yet. But as someone that played the original ones, even with just the Painter story alone,
Yes.
yes, just fully yes, I would recommend this if you're a horror fan. So
Well, okay. So let me ask you this. If you
okay.
uh, I think that Painter story, that to me feels like a full game. You know what I mean? So from the perspective of just that first story, we're just being silly here. This isn't something we're taking to Metacritic, but if you had to jot it down 1 to 10, what would you say that first story would land at on a 1 to 10 rating for you?
Oh yeah, I mean for me that's easily a 9 or 9.5 out of 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just the atmosphere, the scares, I mean that's subjective, but the atmosphere, the scares, the story, the way it just pulls you into it hour by hour, and there's separate chapters you can go back and explore, like just the way they weave it all together for me is a near perfect experience, even with a couple of those little like phone bugs and things. So I
Yeah.
would give it close to a 10 if it was me. I know that's high, but I love it. So what
Yeah.
about you? How would you give the first one, and how would you give the whole package and then having played it?
Right. That's a very important distinction there. The first part I agree. To me, that's like a legitimate, 8.5, 9-ish out of 10. Like it's up there. That is some of the best, like I said, best atmospheric horror that I've ever experienced, some of the best psychological horror that I've ever experienced, and probably to this point, the most technically impressive horror game that I've ever played. Like very, very high praise across the board. Obviously, I'm not talking technical performance and you're running and jumping and ducking and dodging and doing all this at 60. It's not that. It's just from an artistic standpoint, the way that they're swapping, weaving in and out of these different worlds, and all of them having their own unique artistic integrity intact. Like it's so impressive on that front. So that's a 8.59 on the first half for me. The second is 6.57 to me. 6.5 to 7.5. I would no 6.5 to 7 to me. Yeah, it's a big, 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 big drop, but it's still not bad. So I think it rounds out to me at like a low-ish 8 or so.
Okay. There you go. I think that's pretty comprehensive. And unless you have anything else to say about it, that I think is kind of, we just wanted to try to like take a deep dive, would do kind of a review, if you will. So if you guys like this, obviously like you want to see us kind of play a game together from different perspectives, let us know, because it's kind of fun to kind of do a review, if you want to call it that. But I don't know. I think that was pretty cool.
Yeah, no,
Hopefully it helped someone.
yeah, yeah. I hope that I hope you kind of enjoy the more deep, comprehensive deep dives. I would like to do more of these for sure. And obviously, with more time to prepare for one, we can really get into the weeds and structure this thing out. But yeah, I enjoyed that game, and I'm glad that if it wasn't for you, I probably wouldn't have played it. So I'm glad that you recommended the first one so highly. And That first one, boy, I I loved the hell out of that. So 29.99 or yeah, 29.99 if I'm not mistaken.
That's the regular price. Yeah. It's like
Yeah,
$30 basically in the US. So
highly recommend that at 29.99. You know, it's that's a good price just for that first part alone. That first part I would say is worth $30 to me. So
and I think the Bluebird team, if you're watching, we're going to take your tagline, Brandon. This Layers of Fear 2023 is a great game if you don't like reading. Keep smoothing, baby.
Keep smoothing. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the second part you got to do some reading. So it defuncted my lizard brain there. I couldn't just scroll, but it was a damn good experience to me.